Sam Parker had not been spotted in Clove Hill for 14 months, ever since the winter storm that raged through the canyons and ripped shingles off every roof in the town. Some believed he had perished in the snow. Others murmured about a landslide further north, and a few hinted at blood on his hands and a corpse buried beneath his porch. Whatever the reality, by the time he showed up again in early summer, hauling a mule-worn cart along the ridge road with a rifle slung across his back and something hefty wrapped in canvas under sacks of salt and dried meat, no one dared to question where he had been. He arrived as quietly as twilight, boots stirring up dust, beard longer than ever before, and eyes hollowed out into something barely human. The general store owner, Tom Jenkins, attempted a smile when Parker stepped inside that morning. The smile felt strained, like a man confronting a bear that had yet to decide if it hungered. "Here for nails or rope?" Jenkins asked, instinctively reaching beneath the counter where he kept an old Smith & Wesson. Parker ignored him, placing 4 silver coins on the worn wooden surface and gesturing toward the iron tools hanging on the far wall. Jenkins retrieved them silently, his palms slick with sweat. Outside, Parker loaded the tools onto his cart alongside a broken saddle and a pile of firewood he had chopped himself by the creek. The sun blazed down on the parched dirt road, and horses snorted somewhere in the distance. Yet Parker moved like a figure carved from stone and shadow, detached from the bustling world around him. People observed him from windows and behind curtains, their gazes flickering toward the canvas-covered object in the rear of the wagon, something elongated and irregular, tied with rope. It might have been a deer, perhaps, or a bundle of fence posts, yet the way he moved around it, carefully, protectively, never losing sight of it, made the onlookers uneasy. Inside the saloon, the piano came to a halt as he entered. A card game froze mid-round. The bartender, old Emmett, who had served Sam Parker whiskey on the night his daughter vanished, cleared his throat but remained silent. Sam appeared older, not just in the wrinkles on his face, but in the way his shoulders were set and in the solemn atmosphere that clung to him like a dark stain. He did not order a drink. He did not sit down. Instead, he stood quietly for a moment, scanning the crowd, then turned and walked away without a word. They let him pass. Nobody trailed behind. Nobody wished to follow. It was close to dusk when he arrived back at the outskirts of town, the mule moving slowly, its hooves dragging through patches of gravel and sagebrush. He did not pause at the church, did not glance toward the cemetery, and did not acknowledge the boy waving from the blacksmith's yard. His eyes stayed fixed ahead, focused on the trail curving toward the south ravine, the route leading to his ranch, the land only he managed, a place people spoke of only in hushed tones. The sky glowed orange behind him as he passed the old hanging tree, where 3 rusty horseshoes dangled in the wind like metallic chimes. At the point where the path split near Miller's Hill, the mule stopped without any prompt. Sam Parker dismounted, stretched his back, and circled the cart. He carefully pulled back the canvas just enough to expose worn wood, rusty hinges, and a small carved detail, delicate and floral. It was a coffin with no nameplate or inscription. He gazed at it for a long moment before covering it again. No one had asked about that box. No one had dared to. Under the vast silence of the stars that night, he arrived at his ranch gate. The hinges made a creaking sound as he pushed it open. Weeds were tall, and the fence partially crumbled. He secured the mule, unloaded his tools, and left the cart where it stood. He lifted the coffin by himself, slowly and with great care. Inside the house, everything was untouched. Dust lay thick on the mantel. One lonely teacup remained on the table, and an apron still hung where his wife used to keep it. He placed the coffin in the middle of the main room and lit a lamp. Unwrapping the canvas revealed not a body but a collection of items. A locket, a doll missing an eye, a Bible with edges singed, and a small blue dress stained with an old brown mark. He closed the lid gently and then sank into the closest chair, remaining still until dawn. No tears fell. No prayers were spoken. Just silence. Outside, the wind rattled the shutters, but Sam sat rigid, haunted not by spirits but by memories heavier than guilt and colder than sorrow. The next day, he stayed away from town. Quietly, behind the shed, he dug a deep, square hole. He lined the grave with stones and placed the coffin in the soil without any ritual. No sign, no words, just dirt mixed with sweat and the heavy silence that quietly covered the past. That evening, as the sun faded behind the hills and bats began to stir in the rafters of the barn, he found himself once more sitting on the porch, holding an unlit pipe. A storm was brewing on the distant edge of the prairie, the wind shifting with the strong scent of rain and dust. It was at that moment he heard it, the jingle of harnesses, the sharp bark of a merchant's mule, and the low, coarse laughter of men who clearly did not belong to the quiet. He turned his head to see a wagon coming, rocking unevenly. 4 men rode it, no locals from Clove Hill, dressed in rough uniforms lacking any badges. At the back of the wagon, held tightly by chains on her wrists and ankles, lay a woman, scantily dressed, her body marked with streaks of red and dirt, her hair tangled and stuck to her face. The wagon came to a stop just beyond his gate. One of the men jumped down, spat on the ground, and shouted into the silence, "Fresh stock! Traded her from Jasper's pit for 2 barrels of kerosene and a busted compass. Tough one, but she doesn't talk. Doesn't cry either. Might be damaged in the head. Anyone interested, speak now before she bleeds out." Sam Parker did not get up. He did not even blink. He watched as they forced the girl to sit upright, chains clinking, her knees giving way into the dry grass. She lifted her head slowly, and in the last light of dusk, their eyes locked. His expression stayed stone cold, yet beneath the calmness, something shifted quietly, like the snap of a thread stretched too far. He rose, stepped down from the porch, and walked at a measured pace toward the wagon. The men straightened just a bit, one placing a hand near his belt knife. "We aren't seeking trouble, mister. Just trying to unload a heavy weight," one said. Sam did not reply. He paused beside the cart, glancing once more at the girl, the marks on her skin, the bruises, the burns. Then his gaze fell on the chain entwined within the floorboards. He reached for a knife at his belt and cut through the tether before anyone could say a word. The girl swayed but remained upright. One of the men stepped forward and said, "Hey now." Sam turned, simply turned. The man froze in place. Sam threw a sack of coins onto the dirt and then lifted the girl, chains included, carrying her back toward the house. She made no move to resist. She did not utter a sound, yet her eyes never left his. Not for a moment. In that glance, as the wind swept dust across the ground and distant thunder rumbled beyond the hills, something timeless passed between them. It was not recognition or gratitude. It was something older, something like understanding or warning or perhaps both. The chains dug deeply into her flesh with every jolt of the carriage, the iron straps painfully tight, the rusted links cutting through scabbed wounds that had not healed yet. She did not scream. She did not plead. not even when the carriage struck a bump and she was thrown against the side railing. Not when one of the guards chuckled and flung stale bread her way, fully aware it would fall just beyond her grasp. And not when they halted atop a hill overlooking a house that seemed to have forgotten joy long ago, where a man stepped onto the porch looking more like a figure shaped from ash than a living being. Lydia's fear had long since extinguished. She felt it slip away during the second night underground, when the last candle sputtered out and she understood what darkness meant when it had formidable teeth. After that came the biting cold, then hunger, followed by silence, then the names of the others softly whispered into memory before they vanished. And now, here she was, alive still, barely, but not broken, not in the way they had predicted. The man approached them slowly, dust swirling around his worn boots, his rifle hanging by his side yet untouched, his eyes completely unreadable. One of the traders stood straighter, shifting his hand closer to the handle of a pistol, but the man remained unfazed. He regarded them as if they did not even merit his attention, as if he had witnessed far worse, had become something far worse, and whatever they brought with them was insignificant compared to the burden reflected in his gaze. He never asked who she was. He never questioned why she was bound in chains. He never inquired what had been inflicted upon her or what she might have done in response. Instead, he looked straight at her, not noticing the bruises, nor the dried blood crusted on her dress, nor the metal cuff fused around her wrist or the burns etched across her shoulder like fractured scripture. He stared deep into her eyes, and something inside her tensed, waiting for the familiar spark. Revulsion, sympathy, intrigue, or desire. Yet there was nothing. Only stillness remained, that kind which can either mean madness or a mercy too worn to be named. The man faced the trader, who was chewing on a reed, and spoke with a voice rough like cracking dry bark. "What is the price for the chain?" The trader blinked, spat to the side, and answered, "It is not really about the metal, friend. She is tied to a debt. No bill of sale exists, but she comes from Jasper's place." You aware of Jasper? Tough as snakes and even harder to kill. He has a dozen like her down south, but this one is trouble. She killed a handler with a belt buckle. We were told to dispose of her quietly. Thought we would make a stop and see if someone wanted a discount on madness. The man remained unmoved. How much for the chain? The trader chuckled, though it sounded uneasy now. You don't want this trouble. We will be blamed just the same if she turns up skinned and buried on your land. Are you looking to pay for another's sins? Sam Parker reached into his coat. Not for a gun, but for a pouch of coins wrapped in oilskin. He dropped it onto the dirt between them. The silver coins rattled against the rock. The others watched, tense and uncertain. The trader bent down, opened the pouch, his eyes widening slightly as he saw what was inside. "Jesus Christ," he muttered. "Are you serious?" Parker did not move. The trader shrugged and nodded to one of his men, who bent down with the file and started to saw through the chain. Lydia showed no response. Not when the metal separated. Not when her weight shifted forward, forcing her to catch herself on bloodied knees. Not even when Sam Parker stepped forward and lifted her into his arms, her body as light as damp linen and just as cold. She anticipated the usual rough grasp, groping hands, and whispered warnings. Instead, he held her as if she were something fragile but not valuable, as though she was already damaged and he simply wanted to prevent her from falling apart before they got inside. The traders mounted their horses, laughing nervously now, eager to depart. "Safe travels, stranger. one called over his shoulder. "If she doesn't strike you down on the first night, maybe you're madder than she is." Inside the house, the air was heavy with dust and the scent of citrus oil. The walls made no sound when they entered. The quiet was too thick. He carried her along a short corridor past a shuttered room into a side chamber with no bed, only a cot, a basin, and a small stove pressed against the wall. He placed her down softly, stepped back, and shut the door. She heard the bolt slide into place, not to imprison her, but to shut the outside world out. A minute passed, then 2. Then the door opened again, and he came back with a bucket of warm water, a cloth, and a folded gray garment. He said nothing. He simply set them beside the cot and left once more. No questions, no help, no threats. She carefully tore the wrecked dress away from her body in fragments. The injuries looked far worse than she had recalled. Bright red cuts, some infected, others fresh, all painfully sensitive. Methodically, she cleaned them using the cloth, flinching quietly without making a sound. She wiped away the dried blood from her arms, neck, and inner thighs. Then, with great care, she lifted the garment he had left behind. It was a plain dress, made of soft flannel, worn but spotless. The stitching was delicate, with the hem let out to fit someone taller than her. Inside the neckline, a faint yet readable name was sewn, Rose. Not hers, never had been, but it belonged to someone important, someone he had loved, buried, or perhaps both. Lydia slipped it over her head. When Sam Parker came back several hours later, carrying a bowl of broth and cornbread wrapped in a linen cloth, she was sitting on the cot. Her hair still damp from washing, her gaze fixed on the wall. She remained silent. He had no expectation for her to speak. He placed the food down, turned to leave, but then stopped. "It belonged to my wife," he said without meeting her eyes. "You don't have to wear it." She said nothing, and there was no need to. He closed the door behind him more slowly this time. That night, sleep eluded her. She lay under the covers, attentive to the sounds filling the house. The creaking of aged wood, the wind rattling dry branches against the roof, and distant coyote calls reverberating across the canyon. Yet, no footsteps approached. No keys twisted in locks. No heavy breathing lingered near the doorway. Only silence, and the faint smell of something slowly burning in the hearth, a clean fire, free of smoke or decay. Somewhere in the darkness, Lydia finally allowed her fingers to loosen. Her hands had been clenched so tightly she hadn't realized the pain building. She did not understand what the man sought from her. Perhaps nothing, perhaps everything. But in that instant, for the first time in many months, she sensed she was not prey. Instead, she was a question someone had not dared to resolve. Deep within her, in places untouched even by the cruelest men, something small and sharp awakened, something older than mere survival. Not hope, not yet, but the faint remembrance of it. It did not start with conversation or touch, but with the creak of a door intentionally left unlocked. Sam Parker had never been one for formality, yet he was taught to secure doors against the dark, to make sure latches were fastened and shutters closed tightly, especially in such a remote place where the breeze could carry voices that did not belong to the living. Still, the night after he discovered her in the crib wearing his late wife's gown, he left her door unfastened. He said nothing and did not glance back as he removed her empty bowl from the room, even when her eyes followed him with a calm that no longer seemed like fear, but something much more unsettling, an alertness without accusation. She never expressed thanks, nor did he anticipate it. But that evening, an unspoken connection passed between them. A pause, a transformation, the quiet of a home starting to breathe in a new way. She did not fall asleep immediately. Instead, she remained seated on the cot, folding her arms around her legs, her bare feet resting on the polished floorboards. The dress she wore no longer reeked of decay and smoke, but carried the scent of soap and cedar. Her hair had dried in soft waves over her collarbone, and when the breeze slipped through the small window above the cot, she raised her face into it. Not for comfort, but as a reminder that life beyond still moved forward, that she was no longer beneath it. Sam Parker sat downstairs at the kitchen table, his back turned to the fire, a metal cup of tea cooling in his hand. He refused to drink. He hadn't since the day they discovered the blood behind the chicken coop, and nothing more was ever found. Rose had disappeared in an instant, and by the time anyone realized and began searching, it was already too late. The land claimed those who were weak or slow, but she had been neither. That meant someone else had taken her, or something even worse. Since that day, his words grew scarce, his efforts doubled, and he buried more secrets beneath the soil than he would ever confess. But now, there was this girl, Lydia. He never asked her name, yet it somehow reached him, etched onto a metal plate resting under her collarbone, deeply set within a burn mark, as if someone had to remember and chose suffering to do so. That evening, she surprised him. She descended the stairs barefoot, moving cautiously like someone who had only ever known hallways where silence was safety and sudden sounds meant pain. He heard her long before he saw her, the soft creak of a step he had never repaired, the quiet breath she held as the wind shifted. She paused in the kitchen doorway, never stepping inside. She simply stood there, watching the flames flicker on the hearth, watching him carefully avoid meeting her gaze. He did not turn around, but spoke without looking. "Are you hungry again?" She shook her head gently. He sensed it rather than saw it. The air shifted slightly with her movement. He reached into the cupboard and took out a folded cloth, which he placed on the table. Inside was a small carving knife, not like those used in the kitchen, but something more delicate, older, designed especially for shaping wood. He slid it toward the edge closest to her. "My wife used to carve spoons," he explained. "She did it when sleep would not come. She said the carving kept her hands from recalling other memories." Lydia moved forward carefully, her toes curling against the chilly floor. She did not touch the knife, not just yet. But she took a seat. That alone was enough. What followed was slower, more unusual. She remained silent. He never rushed her. The days slipped by with their tasks unfolding side by side. She repaired whatever she could, ripped sacks, faulty hinges, and damaged boards. He allowed it, never remarking when she handled tools he had not touched in many years, or arranged nails meticulously by size in orderly lines across the table. She stayed on the property without leaving once, not even to visit the ridge. From the porch, he observed as she pulled a broken chair into the sunlight and sat facing away from the barn wall, holding a piece of leather in one hand and a small knife in the other. She etched lines into the leather, not designs or symbols, just simple strokes, possibly marking each day or each night without dreams. The cadence of her work became woven into the house's essence, like the ticking of the ancient clock or the creaking of the boards when the air fell to around 10 degrees Celsius. Then, after 2 weeks of sharing the space silently, the first genuine connection finally occurred. It was evening. Sam Parker had just come back from inspecting the northern fence, a coil of barbed wire resting on his shoulder. The sun had quickly set, bringing a sharp chill that marked the beginning of early autumn. He entered through the back door, his boots coated in red dust, and almost missed something. The sound of movement upstairs. It was not the kind of pacing he knew, but something more searching. He moved cautiously, uncertain, and discovered the door to the shuttered room slightly ajar. The room had remained untouched since Rose vanished. No one had entered it, not even Sam, not for cleaning or any reason. Yet Lydia was standing there now, barefoot in the center, her hand hovering just above the dresser where Rose's music box lay closed, coated with dust and a delicate strand of cobweb. She didn't acknowledge him when he stepped inside the doorway. She stayed still. Her fingers shook, not from fear, but due to restraint. Then she did something he could not interpret. Slowly, she turned and walked past him, not glancing back or hesitating, and as she passed, the back of her hand brushed against his coat sleeve. Barely a whisper, a flicker of warmth, a touch so faint it should have meant nothing. Yet he felt it like a thunderclap. She had meant to touch him. No accident, no slip. Just enough to say, "I see you." The following morning, the music box rested on the kitchen table. She must have brought it down during the night. He gazed at it for a long while before reaching out and brushing the dust off its edge. When he lifted the lid, the melody did not play. It had been out of order for many years. Inside, however, was a single curled slip of paper, a note, 3 words penned in a tight, slanting handwriting. "Do not forget her." He flipped the paper over. Blank. No signature. No date. Only those 3 words. He placed the box aside and remained silent when she came down to eat. Yet he noticed her hair styled differently that morning, pulled back with a worn blue ribbon he had never seen before. It had once belonged to Rose. He knew this because he had found it hidden beneath her pillow the week after she disappeared. He had not touched it since then. The balance shifted gradually, without noise or fanfare. It happened slowly, like roots inching beneath a doorframe. Lydia started humming during her work, not full songs, but scattered, airy, delicate tones. Sam often found himself pausing, not from fatigue, but because he didn't want to break the sound. She moved, as if she belonged there, not in a possessive sense, but with the calm assurance of someone who had endured harsher trials and no longer feared unseen shadows. By the window, she kept a bowl of dried herbs filled with things she refused to name. Occasionally, deep into the night, he would hear her speaking quietly. Not in English, not in any language he understood. The words were whispered, slow, rhythmic, like a prayer from a time long before. He did not ask. One evening, after fixing the barn door warped by a summer storm, he returned inside to find the table arranged for 2. No candles, no decorations, just 2 bowls and 2 cups. Lydia stood beside the stove, ladling stew. She didn't look at him but said quietly, "You built this house to forget, but it remembers." He said nothing. He merely sat down and ate. When the meal was finished, she reached across the table and placed a single carved spoon into his hand. The spoon was rough and unrefined, but genuine. Its handle resembled a tree branch, and the tip curved enough to hold more than it appeared to. He turned it over in his hand. She did not smile or offer an explanation. She simply stood and left the room. Later that evening, as the flames dwindled and shadows extended across the floor, he set the spoon next to the music box on the mantelpiece. For the first time in more than 1 year, he spoke her name aloud. Not Lydia's, but Rose's. "I am still here," he murmured softly. "I have not forgotten." Above him, on the upper floor, a single floorboard creaked. Then all fell silent. That night marked a shift in the wind. Neither of them found rest. The storm arrived suddenly, not the kind that slowly gathers over several days with thick clouds and restless animals, but one that falls from a clear sky like an inevitable verdict. It was approaching dusk when Sam Parker was in the southern meadow, inspecting the fence where the coyotes had been probing the wire, a gradual intrusion by scavengers more patient than desperate. The air had remained motionless throughout the day, heavy with that quiet tension before autumn when the wind seems to pause and even the insects slow their movements, as if hesitating. Inside the barn, Lydia was quietly busy as usual, sorting through the dried herbs she had gathered along the ridge that week, rosemary, pine needle, and a bitter leaf he did not recognize but had learned not to question. The sky changed not to darkness, but to a hue too deep to seem natural, a purple tinged with smoke and metal, like a bruise stretching across the horizon. Sam straightened from the post he was fixing and glanced toward the hills, then back at the house. He did not run. He never ran. Yet he moved swifter than normal, tossing the wire and hammer into the crate and swinging up into the saddle just as the first fierce gust slammed across the field, sending the chickens screeching into the coop. When he arrived at the barn, Lydia was already standing outside. She wore no coat or shoes, her arms hanging loosely by her sides. Her face was lifted toward the sky as if she could sense something distant, something profound, authentic, and timeless. The wind tossed her hair round her face, yet she remained unfazed when the first flash of lightning tore through the ridge. Though it was too far to cause harm, the thunder was loud enough to shake the ground. Sam Parker leapt down, grabbed her arm firmly, and yelled above the gusts, "Come inside!" But she stayed rooted in place. Her eyes were wide open, her lips moving silently, and then her hand suddenly shot out, not toward the house but pointing northward, toward the ancient pine tree leaning over the cattle shed. It was the tree Tom Jenkins had planned to cut down last spring, but had left standing, perhaps out of nostalgia, laziness, or something more difficult to explain. He spun around, just in time to witness the sky tear apart. Lightning struck the tree not with a simple hit, but as a fierce blast. A brilliant white flash that illuminated the whole ranch for a moment before the thunder followed, shaking the earth with its roar. The tree did not collapse. It exploded, sending fragments of wood and fire flying wildly like scattered bones, the air heavy with smoke and ozone. Sam Parker stumbled back, almost losing his balance, ears buzzing, heart racing. His gaze fell on the shed which still stood barely intact. One corner was burning, the wall split right down the center. The cattle inside cried out in fear, alarmed by the destruction. Then he noticed her. Lydia remained still as a rock in a river, her body shaking yet firmly rooted, eyes fixed on the smoking wreckage. Finally, she turned toward him. He never questioned how she knew. He never wondered why she had not spoken, fled, or screamed. Instead, he simply took her hand, not with authority, but with empathy, and together they forced the gate open and began leading the animals out, one after another, even though the wind fought to push them back and sparks flickered at the cuffs of their clothes. They moved as one, her touch gentle along the frightened animals' sides, his voice calm and reassuring. It took them an hour to bring all of them to safety, an hour filled with sweat, smoke, and thunder roaring overhead like gods trampling through a blazing sky. Yet they succeeded. When the final calf was safe inside the stone shelter next to the feed room, Lydia fell to her knees in the mud, drawing deep, silent breaths, and Sam Parker knelt quietly beside her, saying nothing, simply observing the rise and fall of her shoulders. After the storm had passed and the lightning had faded into another realm, Sam Parker brought her inside and settled her by the fire. Her hands were badly burned, the skin swollen and covered with blisters in patches. He silently retrieved ointment and water, carefully treating her wounds and wrapping her fingers with linen strips, avoiding her gaze. Yet she looked at him. When he finished, she reached into the pocket of the dress still belonging to his wife, still far too big, and pulled out a small brass item. It was a key, old and worn, the kind that belongs to boxes or cupboards. She placed it gently on the table between them, her bandaged hands shaking slightly. "She showed it to me," she whispered in a raw, hoarse voice, heavy with meaning. "In the dream. I saw her by the pine tree where the lightning struck. She told me not to fear fire, that it only consumes what is already empty." Sam gazed at the key, knowing exactly what it unlocked. He remembered what he had hidden beneath the floorboards in the back pantry, sealed with nails hammered by hands long forgotten how to be gentle. That night, after Lydia had fallen into a sleep so profound it appeared like death itself, Sam Parker opened the concealed space behind the pantry and retrieved the box. He had not touched it for 2 years. Inside were the letters Rose had sent when she first arrived, full of hope in this land and in him, before the earth turned harsh and something within her had died. The key fit without any trouble. By the light of the fire, he read each letter as though every word was a sharp blade, and every signature summoned a memory. At the bottom of the bundle was a photograph, Rose standing before the barn, her hand resting on the side of a horse now long gone, her eyes gleaming. He gazed at that image for a long while until the fire reduced to glowing embers and the wind outside ceased sounding like a warning. When morning arrived, Lydia was already awake. Her hands were now wrapped in clean cloth, and barefoot she stood in the field, watching the smoke rise from the remains of the tree. Sam stepped onto the porch, holding the photograph. She turned toward him, her expression impossible to read. He said nothing, only extended the photo to her. She accepted it, glanced once, then carefully folded it and slid it inside the bandage on her arm. Not to conceal it, but to preserve it. Then she nodded, faced the field again, and said without looking, "It was not the storm. It was the memory of what you failed to do. Lightning just came after that." And he understood. The rumor began at the general store, as often happens, with flowers scattered on the counter and weary women exchanging glances that conveyed more than their words. Someone mentioned seeing the girl walking barefoot across Parker's field before the storm arrived, her head tilted as if she were hearing voices carried by the wind. Another woman claimed to have heard the girl speaking to the horses, not mere gentle murmurs or whistles, but actual words, phrases in a language unfamiliar to her. By the end of the week, the girl had no proper name in the town, only a shadow. The one who came chained, or even worse, Parker's witch. The preacher's wife refused to pass by the gate if the girl was outside. A boy insisted the girl touched his dog and that the animal howled for hours afterward, refusing to come near water. When milk spoiled unusually fast in 3 separate homes, and when the old grave on Miller's Ridge collapsed under a heavy rain, revealing bones without a coffin, the whispers grew crueler. Sam recognized the sound of a community unraveling. He had witnessed it before, long ago, when a woman in Pine Creek took her own life and the townsmen buried her child with her, declaring the bloodline cursed. He remembered the pitchforks, the burning hatred in the men's eyes when logic surrendered to fury. Now that same feeling returned, echoing in the footsteps trailing him at the smithy and in the lowered voices that masked blame as ordinary talk when he stepped into the saloon. Yet Lydia did not appear frightened. She moved around the ranch as though the storm had loosened something inside her, as if she no longer required anyone's approval to simply be. She walked without shoes, calm and deliberate, her hands now healed into marked but capable tools. She created objects, small, intricate charms made of twine and wood, buttons carved from bone and feathers from birds, items she hung on nails or draped above doorways. Sam Parker did not question her. He observed as she fastened 3 strands of dark horsehair over the chicken coop and murmured quietly while the chickens clucked softly and shifted with unusual calm. He saw her kneel beside the well, rest both hands on the stone edge, and remain still for more than an hour without moving. At night, she sat close to the fire with a book she could not decipher, turning pages just by touch. She never mentioned the town or expressed any desire to leave. Yet her silence now seemed less like evasion and more like a silent readiness. When they arrived, it was not with chaos. They appeared in boots and hats, their voices firm under the afternoon sun. 8 figures total, men and 2 women, standing silently at the border of Parker's land, weapons at their sides but eyes alert. They did not shout. They simply waited until Sam descended from the barn and approached them by the gate. The eldest among them, Martin Withers, stepped forward, his hands roughened by time, his face lined and hollowed from years of harboring resentment like water trapped in a cracked vessel. "We want her gone," he stated plainly, without anger, only the hard conviction of a man certain of his own righteousness. Sam showed no reaction. "Why?" Withers held his ground. "You know the reason. Ever since she arrived, cattle have been stillborn. Crops fail before their time, and the wind never blows as it should. My boy says she speaks to things invisible. My wife wakes screaming, claiming she saw her standing at the foot of the bed, just watching." Sam fixed his gaze on him for a long moment, then asked, "Did she ever touch your boy?" "No," came the answer. "Did she come near your bed?" "No." "Then maybe it is your home that is broken." Withers edged forward. "You think this is mere superstition? Death clings to her. She moves as if she has been inside the earth and returned wrong. We have witnessed strange things. You have too." Sam's hand rested gently on the post. He kept his voice steady. "She cannot speak. Being mute does not mean she cannot hear," a man behind Withers remarked. "And being deaf does not mean she cannot see. She witnesses things she should not, things beyond our right to observe." Sam turned his gaze, noting a figure behind the curtains. Lydia stood just inside the house, her eyes steady, hands relaxed at her sides. She showed no fear, not of them, not of this moment, only weariness. Sam stepped forward, his boots sinking into the earth as if anchored. "You all gathered here because fear drives you. But you do not understand what frightens you. That ignorance is what makes you perilous." Withers frowned deeply. "We have come to safeguard the town." Sam's jaw clenched harder. "From a girl who has not uttered a sound since arriving?" "From a girl who knows where the dead lie before anyone else," said the woman beside Withers, arms folded. From a girl who does not weep or bleed when she should. From something unnatural. Sam stood firm. Then leave. There is no place here for your fear. We do not wish to return with flames, the woman cautioned. We have witnessed the consequences when men choose poorly. Sam Parker rested against the gate. So have I. He waited patiently. Withers held his gaze a little longer before turning away. The others followed silently. No gunfire, no warnings. Yet the message was clear. He watched them disappear into the distance, then faced the house once more. Lydia remained where he had left her. He climbed the porch steps, opened the door, and met her eyes. "They will return," he said. She gave a quiet nod. No further words passed between them. That evening, they chose not to light the fire. Their meal was simple, cold bread with cheese, and they sat quietly in the darkness, ears tuned to the howling wind. Outside, nothing stirred. Still, the atmosphere was charged, as if the very air held its breath for too long. After 2 days, the first corpse appeared, but not a person, a cow. It had been slaughtered not for food, but for some ritual purpose, its ribs incised with strange symbols, hooves charred as if by fire. The sheriff came to question Sam Parker, though he did so cautiously. He inquired whether any strangers had been seen on their land, or if Lydia had spoken about the mountains. Sam responded with silence, not lying, but offering no answers. Lydia stayed inside without stepping out for 3 full days. Then, suddenly, she walked into the yard and began planting seeds, never in straight lines but in wild, flawless circles drawn in the soil. She hummed softly as she worked. Then the birds returned, dozens upon dozens of them, more than usual, filling the trees, fences, and rafters. They watched and sang before departing as swiftly as they had arrived. On the 7th day, Withers came back, alone, no boots on his feet, no hat upon his head. His face looked pale. His tone was dull. "I was mistaken," he said. "My daughter's boy fell into the well. She was gone, your girl, gone only for a moment, perhaps. But she heard him, caught a sound no one else noticed, pulled him out before his lungs failed. He is breathing now. His eyes are open." Sam waited in silence. Withers lowered his gaze. "You brought her here for a reason. I have no idea what that might be, but I will not return. Not with fire, not with anything." Sam nodded once. Withers turned and walked away. That night, Sam entered the garden. Lydia was kneeling, her palms coated with soil, her hair tangled with leaves. He sat beside her slowly, joints aching with age. She kept her eyes downcast. He said, "They will keep whispering." She answered quietly, "They always will." "Are you not afraid?" "I have faced worse." Then he looked at her differently, and for the very first time he reached out, not out of command or duty, but simply to sweep. A stray curl from her cheek, her eyes closed, her breathing calmed. Between them, the silence became less fragile. It turned into a boundary, a connection, a vow, not to fit in, not to seek approval, but to be truly listened to. And perhaps that was what really mattered. The very first snow arrived on the night Sam Parker failed to return home. It came early for the season, surprising and sharp like crushed bone carried by the breeze, blanketing the ridge in a thin, misleading layer of white that muffled even the howling coyotes. Lydia waited throughout the evening, straining to hear the gate latch, the soft creak of leather, or the unmistakable knock of his boots on the porch steps. Yet, as the sky grew darker and no sound came except the whisper of wind through fragile garden stalks, a tight knot formed deep within her. Before nightfall, she had sensed something was terribly wrong. The signs were subtle but unmistakable now. The chickens had stayed inside the coop all morning, even when she scattered their feed. The milk tasted bitter, and 3 of the protective charms she had carefully woven and hung beneath the eaves had dropped overnight without enough wind to explain it. She fought against her instincts, but the deeper awareness, the part of her that had endured silence, blood, and fire, revealed the harsh truth long before her mind could accept it. Sam Parker was not merely delayed. He had been taken. She moved with purpose, layering her clothes carefully and pulling on the coat Sam Parker had given her when the frosts first appeared a fortnight ago. The garment was oversized, hanging loosely from her frame like discarded skin, yet it carried his familiar scent. Smoke from ash and cedar wood mixed with a subtle metallic hint. She packed a bag with the tools she had stopped questioning long ago, wrapped her fingers in fabric to shield them from the chilly air, and exited through the back door. Stepping into the pale glow cast by the snow-covered moon, she followed the path Sam had taken. It led northward toward the mountain pass, where the terrain dropped sharply into canyons and dense pine woods, a territory locals steered clear of after sunset, even in the warmest months. Sam had ventured out alone to exchange goods with an elderly settler near Bitter Hollow, and was expected back by early afternoon. Yet there was no sign of his return. She understood the reason immediately. The blood appeared quickly, not a large amount, only a faint streak on a crooked fence post close to the junction, partially concealed by frost, the color already shifting towards a rusty tone rather than bright red. Then a boot print, partially dragged. Then another one. A path emerged. She pursued it without hesitation, stepping into the woodland where shadows deepened and snow descended more slowly, as if unwilling to settle on the earth. Her breathing maintained a steady pace, neither frantic nor strained, while her eyes combed the brush like a creature instinctively wired to hunt. She moved faster than was prudent, propelled not by terror but by a sharp focus. She sensed it. His figure bent forward, hands bound behind him, his head bleeding. She could almost feel the rope cutting into his wrists, the boot pressed against his ribs, the warmth of harsh breath against his neck. This was no recollection. It was vision, not belonging to her nor to him, an echo of shared torment that left traces in the air like wisps of smoke. By the moment she arrived at the open space, the cold had vanished completely. The wind had ceased, and snowflakes drifted slowly in spirals around a fire that was too perfectly arranged to be accidental. 4 men gathered nearby, some unfamiliar, yet others known to her. She identified 2 of them. One was from the wagon that had brought her, the man who laughed when she struggled to lift the bread. The other was the Smith's cousin, the one who had asked far too many questions about her scars. The 3rd man wore a badge he was not authorized to bear, and the 4th, broad-shouldered and quiet, held a rifle aimed at the man kneeling on the ground. Sam Parker was bleeding from a cracked lip and a wound on his temple, his hands tightly bound with his coat removed, shirt shredded, and his face lowered, not from surrender, but to conceal something they had yet to break. They had not noticed her presence. Not until she crossed the tree line and the firelight reflected off the silver in her eyes. The man with the fake badge turned abruptly, surprised, then smiled broadly. "Well, Look who the devil brought back." She did not reply, only kept moving forward. One step, then another, through the snow. Her arms hung relaxed by her sides, palms visible. The man with the rifle shifted his aim toward her, but the one with the badge lifted a hand. "No, let her approach. She is exactly what we are after." He spat onto the snow. "He is merely the warning." Sam Parker lifted his head, just a fraction, barely enough to catch a glimpse of her. His eyes were glazed from losing blood, yet still held a keen spark. What passed between them then required no speech. It was not a request, nor a warning, nor even shock. It was a wordless promise shared in silence. She stepped into the open space and whispered so quietly it barely floated on the breeze. "Release him." The man wearing the badge chuckled. "Or what? You think you can kill us with your gaze?" He stepped toward her. "We've heard the rumors about you, witnessed them firsthand. The preacher's wife no longer sleeps inside. Withers claims he hears you creeping through the walls. We assumed Parker was under your spell, but maybe he's just too foolish to realize who you truly are." She remained still, staring intently, then, without any warning, placed her bag down on the snowy ground and opened it. Everyone recoiled at once. She could sense the terror, could almost taste it in the air. Yet all she withdrew was a collection of fabric and bones. She knelt and began to spread out the fragments. Twine, feathers, ashes, teeth, a child's button, and a torn page from a book. The blacksmith's cousin sneered. "What on earth is this?" She spoke softly. "Names." "Names?" they echoed doubtfully. Looking straight at them, she explained. "The names of what you abandoned when you chose to worship fear as if it were a god." The badge-wearing man stepped forward with his rifle raised. Enough of this. But he did not shoot. He was frozen, unable to move his finger. An invisible weight pressed down on his chest. He staggered. The fire's light faded. The wind returned, biting and fierce, tearing through them like a blade in the cold night. She stood firm, her hair whipped wildly about her face. Her eyes darkened now, or perhaps simply mirroring the flicker of the flames. "You believe you understand what I am," she said, "because you cling to pain more tightly than to truth." Her hand rose briefly. With a slight gesture, the rifle shot from the man's grasp, landing several paces away. He let out a scream, not of agony, but something far more terrifying. Sam Parker dropped to his knees. Lydia approached him and loosened the ropes binding his hands. The cords slipped away like discarded skin. He remained silent, incapable of speech. She steadied him, his body heavy but his steps steady. The men did not pursue. They could not. They were held motionless, not by force, but by a flood of memories they had long buried, their guilt, their shadows, all glaring back at them through her presence. By the time she and Sam reached the path again, the snow had grown thicker. He leaned on her for support as they moved, blood seeping from his fingers, yet his gaze never left hers. Once inside the house, she tended to his injuries quietly. She dressed his wounds carefully and wrapped his ribs with steady hands. Sitting by his side, she waited until daybreak. He never questioned what she had done. She never revealed it. Certain truths were too fragile to escape the flames. Spring arrived unannounced, seeping quietly through the thawed soil like an old melody half recalled in dreams. The snow retreated in uneven patches, unveiling dead grass, broken fence posts and scattered bones of animals that had not survived the harsh cold. Yet, at the edge of the Parker Ranch, the thaw brought something beyond mud and decay. It brought bursts of color. Wildflowers emerged through the earth where Lydia had planted nothing, their roots entwined with stones and ash, nourished by blood and memory, and something far older than both. The house itself no longer groaned in the same way. The atmosphere inside had changed. Sam Parker rose early each morning, not haunted by nightmares but stirred by the rhythm of footsteps above. Gentle, purposeful, her footsteps. She no longer moved as if hiding. Her presence filled the home, not as a mere echo or shadow, but as something alive and intentional. Now, she sang sometimes, not often and without words, but in long, slow humming that drifted through the beams and out into the fields like a spell. Not to ward off darkness, but to remind life of its rightful place. The villagers avoided talking about the events in the clearing. It was impossible for them. Those who had encountered her, who had heard her voice and come through without change, bore the memory like a sharp blade pressed just beneath the skin. None ever returned to Parker's property with questions nor torches. They left him alone. Yet, occasionally, small tokens appeared at the gate. A small bundle of herbs, a sheep's bone wrapped in cloth, a string of river beads. They never knocked or called out. They simply left these gifts not out of fear, but out of a hesitant respect. Lydia gathered them. Not daily, but when the winds shifted and she sensed the need. She kept these mementos in a cedar box near the hearth, under the carved wooden spoon made for him, beside a folded photograph of Rose that Sam no longer hid away. They had created something between them, though neither would have dared to name it love, especially not aloud. Love felt too fragile, too easily shattered by the harsh world they had endured. What linked them was older, rooted in labor and quiet understanding. She had learned to sew his shirts without measuring, and he adjusted the barn doors so she could secure them from inside if she wished. He never entered her room unless she left the door open. She did not question where he disappeared before first light and came back with soil on his boots and tired, red-rimmed eyes. It was irrelevant. They were not keeping track. They were simply choosing to be present, choosing to stay. One afternoon, as the sun stretched its rays over the ridge and the hens settled quietly, Sam stood at the edge of the porch, watching Lydia kneel in the field, placing something from her hand into the soil. He could not tell what it was, and she did not explain. But when she stood up, her hands streaked with dirt, she looked at him intently and then nodded toward the hill behind the shed. That night, she led him there. In the darkness, with only a lantern casting light between them, she revealed the spot she had cleared. It was a kind of garden, though not meant for vegetables or fruits. Markers made from branches and old fence boards formed a wide circle, each tied with strips of cloth, some white, some black, some red. She knelt next to one and said, "The others from before." Her voice remained steady. He did not ask for details. Placing his hand gently on her shoulder, he stayed by her side until the lantern's glow faded away. Weeks passed, and once she laughed. The sound startled them both. It was not carefree or light-hearted, but cracked and beautiful, like something long rusted finally breaking free. Sam had just shared a story about a goat from many years earlier, and her face turned toward the window as if the sky itself might hold back her smile. Then the sound came again. She covered her mouth, looking embarrassed. He did not respond with a smile. Instead, he quietly said, "That is what this house needed." On the first day of June, he discovered her near the porch steps holding a bundle, a dress. It was not Rose's, nor borrowed. It was one she had crafted herself. Deep crimson, resembling dried cranberries in the rocky cliffs of canyons. She wore it as if it had grown naturally from her own skin, bare feet touching the dusty ground, her hair loose and flowing. He observed her descend the steps into the sunlight, and for a fleeting moment everything else faded away. The conflict, the sorrow, the tombstones, the bloodshed, even thoughts of Rose. All of it melted into the silence between heartbeats. She stood before him, the fabric gently swaying with the breeze, and said, "You can build a life from what was taken from you if you stop pretending you're still waiting to be punished." He moved closer, reached for her hand, and this time she did not pull back. She did not recoil. She simply held him. Together they remained there in the stillness, unseen and without the need to be witnessed. The sky above stretched vast and patient, and the breeze carried no warnings, only the warm scent of earth returning to life. No promises were spoken, no pledges exchanged, yet something ended that day, something that had to conclude, and in its place something fresh began, quiet, hard-won, and completely theirs.